There are moments in history when politics ceases to be merely a struggle for power and transforms into a stage for something much greater, a script written centuries before any president, king, or empire was born. Today, before the eyes of the world, Donald Trump's foreign policy is not just a geopolitical strategy, but a prophetic movement. There are verses in the scriptures that seemed dormant, waiting for the precise moment when the most powerful nation on the planet would become an instrument of an ancient prophecy. Many look at Washington and see a former president trying to rebuild his global influence, but those with discernment perceive something deeper, the literal fulfillment of plans designed by God and announced by prophets millennia ago. What is happening is not just diplomacy. It is the unfolding of a spiritual war between light and darkness. Trump did not rise by chance. Since his ascent in 2016, Israel's eyes turned to him. When he recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people, the world trembled. For analysts, it was a political move. For prophets, it was a seal. That decision isolated nations, divided alliances, and rekindled forgotten words from Zechariah, Daniel, and Revelation. Jerusalem will be a heavy stone for all peoples, Zechariah 12:3 declared, and whoever tries to lift it will be severely injured. The recognition of Jerusalem was the spark that reignited a spiritual clock, the prophetic clock of the end times. Curiously, while world leaders condemned the decision, within Israel rabbis began to murmur something few wanted to hear. Some called him a modern Cyrus, in reference to the Persian king who freed the Jews and allowed the rebuilding of the temple. Others went further. They said Trump had been anointed for a purpose of restoration. At first glance, this comparison seemed exaggerated, but the parallel is impossible to ignore. Just as Cyrus was not an Israelite, but was used by God to restore Israel, Trump, a secular, controversial, and unlikely man, moved the pieces of the global chessboard in a way that directly favored prophecies related to the Messiah's return. It all began with the Abraham Accords, an initiative that seemed like just another peace treaty between Israel and Arab nations. However, those who read with spiritual eyes perceive what was truly signed there. It was not just diplomacy, it was a spiritual reconfiguration of the Middle East. In Ezekiel 38, an unlikely alliance of nations once enemies is described, and this realignment is the prelude to a prophetic war known as Gog and Magog. The Abraham Accords created the exact foundation for this alliance to form. Countries that once swore to destroy Israel now shake hands in public, while beneath the surface of governments, the greatest spiritual conflict of the modern era is being prepared. Most intriguingly, the signing of this accord coincided with a series of rare cosmic events: eclipses over Jerusalem, signs in the sky, and even the mysterious sound of trumpets recorded in various parts of the world. Coincidence? The prophets would say no. In Joel 2:31 it is written, "The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." Trump signed a peace pact while the sky turned red over the Middle East, and at that moment something shifted in the spiritual balance of the nations. Sources close to the Israeli government claim that rabbis from mystical schools known for studying the secret codes of the Torah declared that the countdown had begun. These scholars identified numerical patterns linking the year of the Accords signing to ancient sabbatical cycles, all pointing to the same point, the beginning of preparations for the revelation of the Third Temple. And this is where Trump's politics enter the most sensitive part of the scriptures. For it is written in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. And for that to happen, the temple must exist again. Beneath the surface of public speeches, discrete movements were taking place. $1 million funds began flowing to Jerusalem. Jewish organizations resumed training Levite priests, and sacred objects, such as the golden candelabrum and the altar, were reconstructed according to ancient instructions. All this under the complacent gaze of the United States, which during Trump's administration became Israel's greatest protector since 1948. While the press discussed economics and elections, prophecy was being fulfilled in silence. But there is an even deeper layer. When Trump ordered the transfer of the American embassy to Jerusalem, something happened in the spiritual realm. Prayer leaders around the world reported unusual sensations, prophetic dreams, visions of the Western Wall covered in golden light, and even sounds of the shofar in distant regions. A Brazilian pastor who was fasting in 2018 recounted that, at the exact moment the American flag was raised in Jerusalem, he heard a voice within him saying, "The clock has started ticking again." At the time, few understood. Now, looking back, it all seems to make sense. Every sanction, every troop withdrawal, every speech against globalism, it was all part of the same plan, to reposition nations according to prophetic lines drawn in Daniel 2 and Revelation 17. The American empire, like ancient Babylon, was used by God to raise and bring down kingdoms, preparing the stage for the final judgment. In Revelation 17:17 we read, "For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority." This passage describes a moment when world leaders, driven by political interests, end up unwittingly fulfilling the divine plan. This is exactly what we see today. Trump's political alliances, his ruptures with international organizations, and his fierce defense of nationalist sovereignty are not merely conservative policies. They are manifestations of a global spiritual division. Some scholars call this the separation of the nations, the prelude to Matthew 25:32, where the Son of Man will separate the sheep from the goats. While many focused on Trump's aggressive style, few realized that he was dividing the world exactly as Jesus prophesied, between those who defend Israel and those who reject it. And this is where the most sensitive point comes in. If Trump was the instrument to restore Jerusalem to the center of world decisions, he may also be the trigger for the final great opposition against it. For every biblical restoration is followed by a war, and the Bible is clear. The final war will begin in the Middle East, when all nations rise against Israel. Trump's role may have been to prepare the ground, reconfigure borders, and awaken the prophecy that had been dormant since the days of Nehemiah. Now, the world enters a phase of tense silence. Israel arms itself, Iran advances, Russia watches, and the United States oscillates between leadership and internal collapse. But those with spiritual eyes perceive. The stage is set. The words of the prophets are becoming headlines. And every political decision that seemed simple reveals itself, in fact, to be part of a plan outlined in the pages of the Bible thousands of years ago. And perhaps, just perhaps, what is happening now is humanity's last chance to understand that prophecy is not allegory. It is a script. And Trump, whether liked or not, is one of the main characters in this final act. What few understood is that, throughout history, God has always used Gentile empires and rulers to fulfill his designs, even when those men did not acknowledge him. Nebuchadnezzar was an instrument of judgment. Cyrus was an instrument of restoration. And now, in the final days, a new type of leader emerges, not necessarily holy, but destined to move the gears of the prophetic clock. Trump, with his unpredictability and political boldness, acted as a piece outside the ordinary chessboard. His foreign policy broke pacts, exposed structures, and brought to light a spiritual reality that the secular world tries to deny. We are on the verge of a global realignment that will culminate in the rise of a one-world government. During his term, Trump withdrew the United States from multilateral agreements that symbolized the attempt to unify nations under a single voice, something that biblically recalls the Tower of Babel. In Genesis 11, men said, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens." It was the spirit of globalization trying to reach eternity without God. Centuries later, that same spirit reappears in forums, treaties, and international organizations that promise peace and progress, but without repentance or truth. Trump broke with that system and, without realizing it, unmasked the heart of Babylon. His critics accused him of isolating the United States, but in reality, he was freeing it from a web of global control. The scriptures speak of a beast rising from the sea, a symbol of peoples and nations, Revelation 13:1. This beast represents the global political empire that will dominate the earth for a time. Trump, by challenging it, became a figure of spiritual resistance, whether consciously or not. That is why he was hated with supernatural intensity. The hatred against him was not just political, it was spiritual. The same kind of fury that pursued Moses, David, and Cyrus. But the spiritual war is not fought only at the polls or on platforms. It takes place in the heavens, in the invisible portals of nations. And it was precisely when Trump initiated the mediation process between Israel and the United Arab Emirates that inexplicable phenomena began to occur. Lights over the Dead Sea, strange sounds coming from the Negev desert, and reports of rabbis seeing pillars of fire in dreams. They claimed these signs were confirmation that the prophetic plan was in motion. An elderly rabbi, interviewed by an Israeli channel, declared, "The angels guarding Jerusalem have been awakened again." This phrase echoed among prophetic Christian communities worldwide. Churches began to pray with greater intensity for Israel. American pastors claimed that God was using Trump to fulfill Isaiah 45. "This is what the Lord says to Cyrus, his anointed. I take you by your right hand to subdue nations before you." Coincidentally or not, Trump was the 45th President of the United States. Many overlook the spiritual weight of this coincidence, but ancient rabbis taught that nothing is accidental. When a number repeats in the scriptures and history, there is a divine signature behind it. And Isaiah 45 describes exactly the role Trump played, opening impossible doors, restoring broken alliances, and preparing the way for Israel's restoration. He was the catalyst for a process that even the Israelis themselves do not fully comprehend. However, every restoration brings resistance. When Israel returns to the center of history, hell reacts. And that is exactly what happened. The same global system that applauded peace speeches began to harden its tone against Jerusalem. Powers began to pressure Israel to cede territories, and influential voices in the West started openly advocating for the division of the Holy Land. This is more than politics. It is the direct fulfillment of Joel 3:2, where God declares that he will judge the nations for having divided my land. Meanwhile, a series of inexplicable natural phenomena began to occur in the United States. Unprecedented wildfires, out-of-season storms, and an increase in earthquakes in regions where they had never occurred. Prophets warned that judgment was beginning with the very nation that had been used to bless Israel. For whenever a nation strays from the divine purpose, the structures of the earth groan. The moral collapse of the United States, accelerated in recent years, is part of this same script. The nation that once sent missionaries to the world now exports relativism and spiritual confusion, and it is in this scenario that the words of Romans 1 are fulfilled. God gave them over to the desires of their hearts. America's internal decay prepares the ground for the transfer of global power, something prophets identify as the rise of the New World Order, the final Babylon described in Revelation 18. But there is something still holding back the full advance of this agenda: the remnant, men and women of prayer who discern the times and intercede for God's mercy. Many believe that Trump's return to the global stage is more than political ambition. It is a spiritual echo. Like Samson, who in his final moments brought down the pillars of the enemy's temple, Trump may be used again to reveal the hypocrisy of nations and expose the darkness hidden in the corridors of power. Within Israel, there is growing expectation. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem already possesses nearly all the utensils needed to resume sacrifices. What is missing? Only political permission. And this permission, according to sources linked to messianic rabbis, is being quietly negotiated with Western leaders. The Bible states that when they say peace and security, sudden destruction will come, 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And this expression, peace and security, is exactly the slogan used in multiple international conferences promoted during Trump's administration. The most striking thing is how everything converges on Jerusalem. Whether we speak of oil, technology, or diplomatic agreements, in the end, all spiritual and political routes pass through that city. Therefore, recent events should not be seen as mere American foreign policy, but as the direct fulfillment of Jesus' words in Luke 21:24. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Trump was the man who interrupted this cycle, restoring dignity and centrality to Israel. But this also accelerated the end times clock. While the world celebrates progress and diplomacy, heaven watches the unfolding of a perfect and inevitable plan. Every treaty signed, every vote in the United Nations, every speech about sovereignty and borders, everything is being used to position the pieces on the final chessboard. The King of the North and the King of the South, mentioned in Daniel 11, are already in motion. Russia aligns with Iran, China observes, and the United States, wounded by internal divisions, prepares for a profound transformation. But amid this chaos, there is a truth few recognize. Prophecy never fails. God does not depend on presidents, but he uses presidents. And history shows that when he wants to move the world, he raises unlikely men, even those rejected by the system itself. So it was with Moses, with David, with Cyrus, and it may be so with Trump. We are living in the final minutes of history. What seemed like politics is in fact prophecy in motion. Trump may not fully understand the role he plays, but he was chosen to shake the world and reveal who truly governs the nations. The prophetic clock will not stop. The restoration of Israel is the prelude to the return of Christ. And in light of this, the question echoes, are you ready? For we are not just in the last days, we are in the final moments before the King of Kings returns to reign in Jerusalem.